My friends, for countless generations the world has prayed. It has prayed in homes, in temples, in churches, on mountaintops, and in moments of deep desperation. Humanity has prayed in times of war and in times of peace, in sickness and in health, in abundance and in poverty. It has lifted its voice to the heavens and asked for a God somewhere to intervene, to correct, to bless, to rescue. And yet, after all these centuries, after all these petitions, after all these cries to the skies, the world remains largely unchanged in its consciousness. Fear still governs the hearts of men. Lack still torments those who believe they are separate from their good. Illness still claims those who trust in external powers more than the life within them. And so we must ask gently, humbly, sincerely, has the world truly understood what prayer is? Most of what humanity calls prayer is not prayer at all. It is pleading, it is begging. It is reaching outward toward a presence imagined to be far away. It is believing that God must be persuaded, convinced, or awakened to our needs. It is the tragic assumption that God lives elsewhere, listens intermittently, and responds selectively. And it is this assumption, this belief in distance, this illusion of separation that renders most prayer powerless. The great misunderstanding of prayer is not in the words we use or the rituals we repeat. The misunderstanding lies in the starting point. The moment you pray to God, you have already accepted the greatest untruth, that God is apart from you. You see, my friends, if God were somewhere else, if God were in a distant heaven, waiting to be summoned, waiting to be moved by your words, then the entire foundation of spiritual life would collapse, for such a God is not omnipresent, not omniscient, not omnipotent. Such a God is merely a larger version of man, a cosmic ruler who must be petitioned, an external force who must be impressed. But this is not the God Jesus revealed. This is not the God the mystics have known. This is not the God who whispered to Elijah in the still, small voice. And this is certainly not the God whose kingdom is within you. No, the true God, the one presence, the one life, the one. Consciousness is not a being you call forth. It is the very essence of your being. It is the life that animates you, the intelligence that governs you, the love that sustains you. And until prayer begins with this recognition, prayer remains nothing more than spiritual longing. Let us be very clear. Prayer is not asking God to do something. Prayer is not sending thought outward. Prayer is not trying to reach a higher power. Prayer is the quiet, inner recognition of the presence already here. Prayer is turning within, not to bring God closer, but to acknowledge the God who has never left. Prayer is the resting, the yielding, the surrendering into the truth that I and the Father are one. Prayer is not meant to overcome the absence of God. Prayer is the realization of the presence of God. And so when we gather here today, we do so not to add more words to the sky, not to repeat phrases hoping they will ascend to some distant throne. We gather to correct the very foundation upon which prayer has been built in human consciousness. We gather to release the belief in external divinity and to awaken to the kingdom within. For when prayer begins with separation, it ends in frustration. But when prayer begins with union, it ends in revelation. This is the great misunderstanding the world has carried for centuries, and this is the misunderstanding we will dissolve today. For the moment you stop praying at God and begin praying from God, from the presence, from the oneness, from the truth of your being, everything changes. The entire structure of your spiritual life shifts, and the fruits of prayer begin to unfold naturally, effortlessly, gracefully. Let us begin there by remembering that the God we seek is the God who is already here. My friends, as we move more deeply into this sacred exploration, let us look honestly and tenderly at why so many prayers offered with sincerity, offered with longing, offered with hope seem to go unanswered. It is not because God withholds. It is not because God delays. It is not because God judges. It is because most prayer begins in the wrong direction. Humanity has been trained to pray after it encounters a problem. A sickness arises, then we pray. A bill arrives, then we pray. A loved one suffers, then we pray. In other words, we begin with the problem, and from that problem we reach outward for God. This is seeking second. Seeking second means you acknowledge the outer condition first, and then attempt to bring God into it afterward. You see the disease as real, and then invite God to correct it. You see the lack as real, and then beg God to supply it. You see the discord as real, and then plead for harmony. But what happens when we start with the outer condition? We give it authority. We give it substance. We give it reality. And then we ask God to fight the very thing we just established as powerful. This is why prayer fails. Not because God is absent, but because we begin by affirming a power apart from God. Listen carefully now, for this is central to your spiritual freedom. The moment you believe there is a condition, a person, or a circumstance with power of its own, you have stepped out of the kingdom consciousness. And from that place of separation, no prayer can reach the heights of realization. It is not that God does not hear you, it is that you are not hearing God. You are too busy listening to the voice of fear, the voice of appearance, the voice of the world that insists something is wrong. This is seeking second. And yet, the Master taught us to seek first the kingdom of God. Seek first, not after the diagnosis. Seek first, not after the financial crisis. Seek first, not after fear has taken root in your mind. To seek first is to begin with God as the only presence, the only power, the only reality. It is to look at the appearance, not with denial, not with resistance, but with the quiet recognition this condition has no authority in the presence of God, for God alone is real. But here is the subtle trap. Most of us seek first the problem and God second. We begin with fear and try to climb our way back to faith. We begin with lack and struggle to return to abundance. We begin with sickness and beg for healing. Yet, my friends, Spirit has no methods for fixing what does not exist in its own consciousness. God does not heal sickness because God knows no sickness. God does not mend broken supply because in God there is no lack. God does not restore peace because the divine presence has never known discord. So when you pray from the standpoint of the problem, you are praying from a condition God does not recognize and therefore cannot respond to. The only prayer that bears fruit is the prayer that begins in truth, begins in oneness, begins in the recognition of God as the sole reality of your being. And from this standpoint, you are not begging God to change the appearance. You are awakening to the fact that God, being all, leaves no place for an opposing power. Now let us take this deeper. When you pray from anxiety, That very anxiety forms the mold through which your prayer attempts to pass. When you pray from fear, it is fear that shapes the prayer. When you pray from desperation, you have already placed more belief in the appearance than in the presence. This is why many prayers are never felt, never heard, never realized. Not because God is distant, but because we have allowed fear to speak louder than the still, small voice. And so I say to you gently, compassionately, stop beginning your prayer with the problem. Stop trying to drag God into the conflict. Stop asking the infinite to correct the illusion. Instead, first turn within. First acknowledge the presence. First rest in the truth of oneness. For only when you seek first the kingdom can all these things be added. Only when you begin in spirit can the outer world reflect spirit. Only when your prayer arises from the stillness of union can the fruits of grace appear effortlessly. Let us hold this truth in our hearts. The outer world does not shape your prayer. Your prayer shapes the outer world. And prayer can only shape the outer world when it arises from the inner realization that God is the only power. This is the reason most prayer fails. Not because prayer is weak, but because the consciousness behind it is rooted in separation. When the consciousness shifts, prayer becomes not a plea but a realization, and that realization is answered in the moment it is recognized. My friends, there comes a moment in every sincere seeker's journey when the old way of praying collapses. The words no longer satisfy. The begging no longer consoles. The outward search loses its appeal. And in that moment, quiet, trembling, unmistakable, something within you begins to awaken. It is the realization that all your seeking, all your pleading, all your striving was built on the assumption that God was somewhere else. And suddenly, gently, you sense the truth rising as softly as dawn. I and the Father are one. Not as a verse to memorize, not as a doctrine to defend, not as a belief to cling to, but as a state of consciousness to be lived. This simple statement, uttered by the Master, contains within it the entire secret of spiritual life. For when Jesus spoke these words, he was not describing a privilege granted to him alone. He was describing the nature of every soul, the truth of every being, the foundation of all reality. He was revealing the state of consciousness in which prayer becomes a realization, in which healing becomes effortless, in which supply flows without strain, in which fear dissolves into presence. To say, I and the Father are one, is to live from the recognition that there is no separation between you and the source of all life. It is to know that the presence that formed you, sustains you, guides you, and breathes you is the very essence of your being. Listen carefully. This realization is not attained through effort. It is discovered when effort ceases. The mind cannot force oneness. The will cannot manufacture union. Belief cannot create what already is. Oneness is not created, it is recognized. And so, the great shift, the shift that changes everything, is the inward turning of consciousness from trying to reach God to resting in God's ever-present nearness. It is the movement from seeking God outside to discovering God within. It is the surrender of the belief that God needs to be summoned, to the realization that God is the invisible activity of your very life. This shift is not intellectual. It is not emotional. It is not conceptual. It is entirely spiritual. It is the movement from living as a separate self to living as an instrument of the infinite. When you begin to dwell in this consciousness, even faintly, even intermittently, a profound transformation takes place. You begin to sense a stillness within you that is not your stillness, but God's. You begin to feel a presence within you that is not your personality but spirit itself, you begin to know, without explanation, that the life you believed was yours alone is actually the life of God expressing itself as you. You no longer ask God to come to you because you realize you cannot be where God is not. You no longer seek God's help because you realize God's help is the very nature of your being. You no longer plead for God's attention because you realize you live in God's attention. And when this recognition dawns, prayer undergoes a rebirth. No longer is prayer an attempt to change God's mind. No longer is prayer an effort to change the outer world. No longer is prayer a transaction between one who lacks and one who provides. Prayer becomes the sacred act of abiding in the truth that God is the only life, the only mind, the only power, the only reality. You rest, and in that rest the presence reveals itself. You listen not for answers, not for direction, but for the assurance of union, and in that assurance fear dissolves, anxiety softens, and the still small voice is heard. All that I have is thine. Lo, I am with thee always. My grace is sufficient for thee. This is the consciousness from which Jesus healed, taught, and lived. It was never personal power. It was never human virtue. It was never spiritual superiority. It was simply the clear recognition of oneness, and every word he spoke, every miracle performed, every healing demonstrated flowed from this consciousness of union. And so, when you begin to shift from praying to a God somewhere to praying from the presence within, you step into the same stream of consciousness Jesus lived. You enter the same kingdom he revealed. You discover the same truth he taught, that God is not distant, but indivisible from your very existence. This is the shift that changes everything. And from this point forward, prayer will never again be what it once was. It will become a holy communion, a silent resting, a revelation that God and you are not two, but one. My friends, now that we have seen the great shift, the turning from separation to oneness, let us enter into the heart of true prayer. For prayer, as the world understands it, is a reaching outward, but prayer, as Spirit reveals it, is an awakening inward. There is a great secret in spiritual life that very few have discovered, though it stands in plain sight in every sacred text, in every moment of stillness, in every whisper of intuition. That secret is this: real prayer is recognition, not asking, not pleading, not affirming, not visualizing. Recognition. Recognition is the silent awareness of what already is: God's presence, God's life, God's activity, God's completeness right where you stand. Recognition is the inner knowing that there is no distance between you and the source of all being. It is the quiet realization that God cannot be added to you, because God is already the fullness of your life. Let us understand this deeply. When you pray for healing, you are affirming disease. When you pray for supply, you are affirming lack. When you pray for protection, you are affirming danger. But when you close your eyes, turn within, and gently acknowledge the presence that has always been there, even if you do not feel it, even if you cannot sense it clearly, you have begun the practice of recognition. This practice is the essence of what Jesus meant when he said, "The Father within me doeth the works." It is what Paul meant by, "Nevertheless, not I, but Christ liveth in me." It is what the mystics meant by union, by oneness, by the indwelling presence. To recognize the presence is not to create something spiritual. It is to become aware of the spiritual reality that has been present from the beginning. Let us walk through this together, gently and simply. You sit quietly. You breathe without intention. You let the world fall away just for a moment. And inwardly, without words spoken aloud, you acknowledge, Father, thou art here. And because thou art here, nothing else has power. Then you rest. You do nothing more. You do not try to force an experience. You do not strain for peace. You do not attempt to silence the mind. You simply rest in the truth that God is present, even if your emotions, thoughts, and senses have not yet caught up to the realization. Recognition is not about feeling something. It is about knowing something. And as you sit in this quiet awareness, something begins to happen, not by your doing, but by grace. Thoughts slow. The sense of me tries less. A subtle stillness enters the atmosphere of your being. You may not always perceive it, but it begins to move within you. Recognition is the opening through which grace flows. You are not praying to change conditions. You are not praying to heal disease. You are not praying to attract supply. You are not praying to correct a world of appearances. You are praying only to behold the truth of God's presence. And in that beholding, conditions change. And in that resting, healing appears. And in that stillness, supply flows. And in that inner silence, harmony unfolds. Recognition lifts you out of the realm of appearances and places you in the consciousness of reality. Spirit, oneness, God. Let me be clear. Recognition is not passive. Recognition is not resignation. Recognition is not detachment from life. Recognition is the highest form of spiritual activity because it is the only activity that acknowledges God as the only presence and power. You are not praying to fix the world. You are praying to see through the world into the spiritual fact behind every appearance. So how do we practice recognition? We practice it gently, without force, without demands, without expectation. You close your eyes for a few moments and simply acknowledge God is here, God is now, God is the only life, God is the only power, God is the only presence. Then you rest, then you listen, then you allow, if the mind wanders. You do not wrestle it back, you simply return to the inner knowing that God is the center of your being. If emotions arise, you do not suppress them, you let them pass through the atmosphere of peace you are cultivating. With time, recognition becomes a habit. With practice, recognition becomes a state. With surrender, recognition becomes your life. This is what Jesus lived. This is what the mystics embodied. This is what Joel Goldsmith discovered through years of silent communion. And this is available to you right here, right now. Make no attempt to perfect it. Make no effort to force it. Let recognition find you in stillness, and you will discover the secret the world has forgotten. Prayer is not the act of reaching God. Prayer is the awareness that God has already reached you. My friends, let us now enter into the sacred reason why recognition, this quiet resting in the presence, transforms life without struggle, without effort, without manipulation. For there is a law at work in the spiritual universe, a law not understood by the human mind, a law that operates independent of our striving and beyond our reasoning. It is the law of spiritual unfoldment. This law is not human. It is not psychological. It is not based on willpower, intellect, or emotion. It is the activity of God revealing itself through awakened consciousness. When you pray to God, you stand outside this law. You remain in the realm of effect, trying to change conditions by appealing to an external power. But when you pray from the presence, when you begin in the awareness of oneness, of completeness, of divine fullness, you enter the realm of cause. And in the realm of cause, all things unfold naturally, harmoniously, without resistance. Hear this clearly. Spirit acts from within outward, never from without inward. The world teaches that conditions create consciousness. Spirit teaches that consciousness creates conditions. When you rest in the inner presence, you align yourself with the law that governs all creation. You stop trying to shape life according to your fears and begin allowing life to shape itself according to divine order. Praying from presence works because, 1, you are no longer affirming a power apart from God. If you pray for healing while believing in the power of disease, your prayer is divided. If you pray for supply while fearing lack, your prayer is conflicted. If you pray for peace while worshiping anxiety, your prayer is weakened. But when you rest in the truth that God is the only presence and power, the illusion of opposing forces dissolves. In that dissolution, grace flows too. You are no longer trying to force spirit to act. Spirit requires no prompting. Spirit requires no convincing. Spirit requires no pressure from you or anyone else. Spirit is always expressing, always unfolding, always revealing itself as harmony, wholeness, abundance, and peace. When you rest in recognition, you become a clear instrument through which this divine activity manifests. You do not create the harmony. You witness it unfolding. You do not manifest the supply. You observe it appearing naturally. You do not generate the healing. You realize it as an already existing truth revealed in time. 3. You have withdrawn belief from the appearance. Goldsmith taught that appearances have no power of their own. Their only strength is the belief we invest in them. When you recognize the presence, the mind detaches from appearances. Fear loses its claim. Anxiety loosens its grip. The appearance begins to fade, not because you fought it, but because you stopped feeding it with belief. 4. You awaken to a higher law, the law of harmony. There is a law always at work in spiritual consciousness. It is the law that kept Moses safe in the desert. It is the law that sustained Elijah in famine. It is the law that guided the Master through crowds untouched. It is the law Jesus called the kingdom of God. This law never fails. This law never wavers. This law never fluctuates with circumstances. When you pray from presence, you give this law full permission to operate in your life. 5. The sense of a personal self diminishes. It is the personal self, the ego, that fears, struggles, resists, and seeks to control. But as you rest in recognition, the tightness of the personal sense begins to dissolve. You feel lighter, more spacious, more receptive, and into that spaciousness, grace pours. Grace is not something you earn. Grace is not something you deserve. Grace is the natural activity of spirit, where the personal sense is quiet. 6. You return to your true identity. When you pray from presence, you are not praying as a troubled person trying to become spiritual. You are praying as the spiritual being who has momentarily forgotten the truth. Recognition restores your true identity, an identity not limited by conditions, not threatened by circumstances, not diminished by appearances. 7. You align with the rhythm of divine unfoldment. Life is not random. Life is not chaotic. Life is not governed by chance. Life unfolds in perfect sequence when we do not interfere with fear, doubt, and resistance. Recognition removes interference. It lifts you into the rhythm of grace. And in that rhythm, healing becomes natural. Supply becomes effortless. Harmony becomes inevitable. Peace becomes constant. So, my friends, praying from presence works not because it manipulates God, nor because it exerts mental force, nor because it uses the mind as a tool of creation. It works because it places you in alignment with reality, with the inner kingdom, with the divine order always seeking expression through you. The moment you recognize God's presence, something within you and around you begins to shift, not through effort, but through the law of unfoldment, quiet, orderly, certain. This is why the Master taught us to enter the secret place of the Most High. This is why Joel Goldsmith spent hours each day in silent communion, not to make God act, but to witness God's action already taking place. For when you pray from oneness, the work is already done. You need only behold it as it unfolds. My friends, as we walk deeper into the practice of recognition, it is necessary to speak with honesty and tenderness about the obstacles that arise on this path. For though the presence is ever at hand, though God is closer than breath, closer than thought, the human mind does not easily release its ancient patterns of fear, separation, and control. We must understand that the path to spiritual realization is not a straight line. It is more like the unfolding of a flower, slow, gentle, and often hidden beneath the surface. And as with any sacred unfolding, there are moments of resistance, moments of dryness, moments when the mind protests, doubts, and argues. There is no shame in this. There is no failure in this. It is simply the ego's attempt to preserve what it believes itself to be. Let us identify these obstacles with compassion and clarity, so that when they arise, we are not frightened by them, but meet them with understanding. 1. The restlessness of the mind. One of the first obstacles is the mind's inability to remain still. You close your eyes intending to recognize the presence, and immediately thoughts rush in, tasks, memories, fears, distractions. The mind pulls you outward, away from the inner sanctuary, and insists that the world demands your attention. Do not be discouraged. The restless mind is not a sign you are failing. It is a sign the mind is losing its authority. It knows that if you enter the silence deeply, it can no longer dominate your life. And so it resists, not out of malice, but out of fear of its own dissolution. What, then, is the remedy? Do not fight the mind. Do not wrestle it into submission. Do not attempt to silence it by force. Simply turn within again and again and again. Each return to the presence weakens the mind's grip. Over time, the mind learns to sit in the background, quiet, obedient, receptive to the deeper awareness unfolding beneath it. 2. The desire for quick results. Another obstacle is impatience. You begin the practice, you rest in the silence, and then you look eagerly for a sign, for a feeling, for a result. And when nothing seems to happen, the ego whispers, See, this does not work. You are wasting your time. Go back to your old ways. My friends, let us be gentle here. The desire for immediate results is the old consciousness trying to measure the infinite by the standards of the finite. But recognition does not operate by time. Grace does not follow the calendar. Spiritual realization unfolds in its own rhythm, its own season, its own divine timing. The seed in the soil does not sprout the moment it is planted, and neither does the seed of recognition. Do not mistake stillness for stagnation. Even when your senses perceive nothing, the roots of your spiritual consciousness are deepening. The soil is being prepared. The inner atmosphere is being purified. Something invisible is taking place, and it will reveal itself when the time is right. Patience is not waiting for a result. Patience is trusting the presence. 3. Emotional resistance. At times, emotions arise: fear, sadness, anger, doubt, and they feel so strong that you wonder if the practice is making things worse. But I tell you, these emotions are not obstacles. They are releases. They are old patterns dissolving. When you enter the silence, the light of the presence begins to illuminate places in consciousness that have long been hidden, memories you have avoided, fears you have suppressed, beliefs you never questioned. These arise not to overwhelm you, but to be healed by the very presence you are learning to trust. Do not run from them. Do not fight them. Do not label them. Allow them to rise, pass through, and dissolve in the atmosphere of peace you are cultivating. The presence knows how to do the work. Your task is simply to remain receptive. 4. The ego's fear of disappearance. Perhaps the deepest obstacle of all is subtle, quiet, almost imperceptible. The ego senses it is being replaced. It realizes that if you truly recognize the presence as your life, your identity, your being, then the personal self, the small I, the anxious I, the striving I, will no longer be the center of your existence. And so the ego resists. It resists through distraction. It resists through doubt. It resists through procrastination. It resists through sudden urgency to handle worldly matters. This resistance is not evil. It is simply the nature of the personal sense, which believes it must maintain control. The ego survives through activity, through noise, through identification with thought. Silence is its undoing. But, my friends, you must not fear the ego's dissolution, for what disappears is only the illusion of separation. The true self, the Christ within, the presence, the I am, remains untouched, unchanged, eternal. The ego fears losing itself. The spirit rejoices in the realization of oneness. 5. The feeling of nothing happening. One of the greatest illusions on the spiritual path is the belief that silence is empty. Many students come and say, "When I meditate, nothing happens." But I assure you, silence is not nothing. Silence is God in action. The surface may appear still, but beneath that stillness, the currents of spirit are moving. The consciousness is being purified. Old beliefs are being uprooted. New capacities are being formed. The very structure of your inner life is being rebuilt quietly, invisibly, faithfully. Judge not by appearances, even in meditation. 6. The temptation to return to the old ways. When challenges arise, financial strain, illness, conflict, the ego urges you to abandon recognition and return to the world's way of solving problems. Worry, force, control, manipulation. This is the greatest temptation. But if you return to old methods, you are stepping back into the consciousness that created the problems in the first place. The outward struggle continues because the inward recognition has been abandoned. Hold firmly to this truth. Spirit resolves what the personal self cannot. Grace accomplishes what effort never can. Stay with the presence, especially when circumstances insist you cannot afford to. The more the world pulls, the more gently you turn within. My friends, these obstacles are not signs of failure. They are signs of transformation. They appear only because you are entering a new state of consciousness, a state the old self cannot inhabit. When you meet these obstacles with patience, compassion, and unwavering trust, you will discover the great secret. Every barrier on the path is an invitation to deeper union. Every resistance is a doorway into grace. Every doubt is a call to return to the presence. And the presence never fails those who enter it. My friends, it is now time to bring these truths into the living of daily life. For spiritual realization is not meant to remain in the meditation chair, nor in the silence of early morning practice. The presence is not a temporary refuge, it is the foundation of your existence. And so, the true work of recognition is not merely found in the moments when your eyes are closed, but in those moments when they are open. Let us understand this clearly. Recognition becomes transformative only when it becomes continuous. Not constant effort, not constant thought, not constant repetition, but a continuous awareness, quiet, natural, unforced, that beneath every thought, behind every action, within every breath, the presence abides. This is what Joel Goldsmith called practicing the presence. It is the gentle remembrance that wherever you are, whatever you are doing, the Father within is living your life. Let us explore how this unfolds. 1. Begin the day in recognition. Before the world enters your mind, before thoughts begin their movement, before you step into the activities of the day, pause even for a moment and turn within, not to ask, not to plan, not to prepare, simply to acknowledge, God is here. God is the life I will live today. God goes before me. This one moment in the morning sets the tone for everything that follows. You have placed your foot on holy ground before the day begins. You have entered the atmosphere of grace. 2. Carry the inner hum of silence as you move through the day, walking, working, speaking. Let there remain within you a quiet undertone, a subtle awareness that you are not living life alone. This inner hum of silence is the presence. You need not hold thoughts about God. You need not repeat sacred phrases. You need not maintain constant concentration. The recognition may be as gentle as a single breath, as soft as a moment's awareness. The Father is here. This is enough. This opens the door for grace to operate in every circumstance. 3. Turn within before responding. In your interactions, conversations, challenges, decisions, create a small space between the world's stimulus and your response. In that space, silently turn within, even for a second, even for half a second. In that brief pause, you are acknowledging, I do not respond as a human being. I respond as an instrument of the presence. This moment of turning changes everything. A potential conflict softens. A misunderstanding clears. A wise answer arises from nowhere. A problem dissolves without being solved. You discover that your wisdom is not required, for the divine wisdom acts the moment you make space for it. 4. Recognize the presence in others. Perhaps the most transformative aspect of practice is remembering that every person you encounter, stranger, friend, family, adversary, is an expression of the same, one presence that lives within you. Do not relate to their personality. Do not react to their behavior. Do not be disturbed by their moods. Look through the appearance and silently acknowledge the Christ is the truth of you, not spoken aloud, not imposed on them, simply held within your own consciousness. This recognition lifts relationships into a higher atmosphere. It dissolves fear, resentment, and judgment. It opens the way for harmony to replace conflict, love to replace tension, peace to replace separation. 5. Infuse ordinary actions with awareness. It does not matter what the activity is, walking, eating, working, resting. Every action becomes a spiritual activity when you recognize the presence within it. You do not make the action spiritual. The presence already is. You simply become aware of that truth. This is how life becomes prayer. This is how movement becomes meditation. This is how ordinary moments become holy. Recognition is not added to life. Recognition reveals the sacredness already there. 6. Return to the presence when problems arise. When a difficulty appears, a bill, a symptom, a conflict, your old conditioning urges you to react immediately. But now, as a spiritual seeker, you pause, you turn within, you recognize the presence is here, the presence is the only power, the appearance has no authority. Then, from that inner foundation, you take whatever practical steps are required. Turning within first resets the entire atmosphere. It dissolves the fear that clouds judgment. It opens the channel for divine intelligence to guide your actions. It prevents you from acting out of panic and allows you to act out of peace. 7. Let the day close in silence. As the day ends, return once more to the secret place, not to review the day, not to judge yourself, not to seek results, simply to acknowledge, through this day, thou hast lived thy life through me, and then rest. This closing recognition dissolves the accumulated noise of the day and prepares consciousness for the deeper work that takes place in sleep, a time when the presence continues its activity even without your awareness. 8. Allow recognition to become your identity. At first, the practice of recognition feels like something you must remember to do, but over time, something profound occurs. Recognition becomes natural. Recognition becomes effortless. Recognition becomes who you are. You are no longer a person turning toward God. You are a consciousness through which God is expressing. This is the transition from practice to realization, from seeking to abiding, from effort to grace. My friends, integrating recognition into daily life is not about maintaining a spiritual discipline. It is about awakening to the truth that the presence is already living every moment of your life. When you turn within, moment by moment, you are not creating God's activity, you are becoming aware of it. And in that awareness, life begins to flow in a new rhythm, a quieter rhythm, a clearer rhythm, a rhythm of grace, harmony, and effortless unfoldment. This is living from the kingdom. This is living from the presence. This is living the infinite way. My friends, as we come to this sacred moment in our journey together, I wish to speak of the great turning point, the shift in consciousness, where everything begins to change, not gradually, not partially, but wholly and profoundly. It is the moment when prayer ceases to be an act and becomes a state. It is the moment when God ceases to be a concept and becomes an experience. It is the moment when life ceases to be a struggle and becomes an unfoldment of grace. This turning point is not marked by fireworks, nor by extraordinary visions, nor by dramatic emotional release. It comes quietly, as all things of spirit do. It comes naturally, like the dawn lifting the darkness, not with violence, but with inevitability. It comes when your consciousness has been gently prepared through recognition, through surrender, through resting in the presence. And when it comes, you know it, not by feeling, not by signs, but by a deep inner certainty that does not depend on the mind. Let us explore this sacred transition. 1. Prayer no longer begins with desire. At first, prayer arises from need, from fear, from lack, from longing. But at the turning point, prayer no longer begins with seeking anything. Instead, prayer begins with being in the presence, being aware of the presence, being surrendered to the presence. You no longer enter prayer to get answers. You enter prayer to dwell in truth. You no longer pray to change outer conditions. You pray because the inner presence draws you. Prayer becomes communion wordless, formless, without agenda. In this communion, the mind grows still, the heart softens, the personal self disappears, and you discover that prayer is not something you do, prayer is something God is doing in you. 2, you realize that God is not separate from your consciousness. In the early stages, God is above, beyond, or apart. We think in terms of reaching upward or inward to find God, but in the turning point, a great revelation dawns. God is the very consciousness with which you are seeking God. You realize that the presence you are recognizing is not merely near you, but is the very awareness that is recognizing it. This is the great mystical truth. The one who seeks is the presence itself. The I that prays is the I of God. There is no longer you and God. There is only God appearing as you. This realization is the doorway to freedom. 3. Life becomes guided, not managed. Before the turning point, life feels like something you must handle, control, protect, and direct. Your mind works tirelessly to arrange outcomes, manage relationships, and secure your future. But once communion is established, something miraculous occurs. You stop guiding life. Life begins to guide you. The inner prompting becomes unmistakable. The flow becomes natural. The tension that once dominated your days dissolves. You no longer plan your life according to fear. You respond to life according to divine impulse. This is grace in action. This is the effortless direction of spirit. 4. Problems lose their power. A remarkable shift takes place at this point. What you once called problems no longer hold the same authority. They no longer appear as threats. They no longer disturb your peace. They no longer define your state of being. You may still see them, but something in you knows they are not real in the spiritual sense. You begin to understand why Jesus could sleep through storms, why he could walk unharmed through crowds, why he could face the world without fear. The presence within you becomes more real than the appearances around you. You look at difficulties and know these are shadows upon the screen of the world. They have no life in the presence. And so they dissolve, not by force, not by mental effort, but by the simple absence of belief. 5. Grace becomes the atmosphere of your existence. Grace is not something added to life. Grace is the nature of life. When the personal sense dissolves, when prayer becomes communion, grace becomes the governing principle of your existence. You begin to live in a world where opportunities appear without striving, healing unfolds without struggle, supply flows without worry, harmony arises without effort, not because you manifested anything, but because you stopped interfering with the divine order. Grace is the natural state of a consciousness resting in God. 6. The personal I fades into the divine I. At the turning point, the sense of a separate self, the striving, fearing, wounded self begins to fade. What remains is the true self, the Christ within, the I that is one with the Father. You no longer say, I must find God. You begin to hear, I am the life of God. You realize that everything you sought has already been given. Everything you attempted to achieve has already been accomplished. Everything you feared losing was never yours to lose. The divine self emerges, quiet, steady, unshakable, and this is the birth of spiritual freedom. 7. You live the infinite way. When prayer becomes communion and life becomes grace, you are no longer practicing the spiritual path. You are the spiritual path. You are the transparency through which God appears in the world. You do not teach through words. You teach through presence. You teach through peace. You teach through the light that silently radiates from your being. This is the infinite way, as Joel Goldsmith lived it. Not a religion, not a system, not a belief, but a state of consciousness in which God is the reality of every moment. My beloved friends, this turning point is available to you not in the future, not after years of discipline, not after perfecting meditation. It is available the moment you lay down seeking, the moment you surrender effort, the moment you rest in the presence that has always been your life. From that moment forward, prayer becomes communion, life becomes grace, and the soul remembers what it never truly forgot. I and the Father are one. My beloved friends, we have walked together through the great truth that has been hidden in plain sight for centuries, that prayer is not a reaching outward, but a returning inward, that God is not a distant power, but the very life within you, that the kingdom of God is not found in the future, not attained through effort, but revealed through recognition. As we come to the close of our time together, I invite you not to remember my words, not to hold on to the form of the teaching, but to return again and again to the experience we have touched upon, the silent recognition of the presence. For this recognition is the beginning of all spiritual life, and this recognition is also its fulfillment. You stand now at the threshold of a new way of living, a way not governed by fear, a way not driven by desire, a way not shackled by the belief in separation. You stand at the doorway of a life lived in grace. One, you now know where God is found. You no longer need to search the world for God. You no longer need to plead or persuade or perform. You no longer need to look to circumstances for answers. You know now that God is found in one place only, in the silence of your own being. Every time you turn within, even for a single breath, you open the door through which the infinite pours itself into expression. Let this truth be your anchor. God is here. God is now. God is the life I am living. 2. You are never again a seeker. From this moment forward, you are no longer one who seeks. You are one who recognizes. You are no longer asking, how do I find God? You are quietly acknowledging God is already present. And in that simple shift, everything changes. The seeker suffers, the recognizer rests. 3. You carry the secret of grace. What you now hold in consciousness is the forgotten truth that transforms life, not by altering the outer world, but by awakening the inner one. You now know grace is not earned, grace is not achieved. Grace is the natural flow of God appearing through a consciousness that is not resisting. Every moment you rest in recognition, grace becomes your environment. Every moment you turn within, harmony unfolds. Every time you pause in awareness, the presence takes over the activity of your life. This is the great secret the saints lived. This is the secret the mystics embodied. This is the secret Jesus revealed. Grace is the law of the spiritual universe. Recognition is the key that opens the door. 4. You have nothing left to fear. Fear arises only when you believe in a power apart from God, but now you know there is no such power. Appearances may still arise, but they will no longer possess the authority they once held. For now your response is no longer panic, your response is recognition. And in that recognition, the recognition of the one presence, the one power, fear dissolves like a shadow fleeing the light. The presence goes before you. The presence walks with you. The presence is the life you live. Where then is fear? It has no place where God is all. 5. Your practice is simple. Turn within. Do not complicate the path. Do not burden yourself with rituals or strain for spiritual attainment. Your entire practice, your entire path, your entire unfolding can be summed in these 2 words. Turn within. Turn within in the morning. Turn within in the evening. Turn within when troubled. Turn within when peaceful. Turn within when the world pulls you outward. Turn within when harmony flows effortlessly. This turning is the doorway. This turning is the sanctuary. This turning is the infinite way. 6. You are now living the life Jesus taught. Jesus did not come to establish a religion. He came to reveal a consciousness. He did not ask you to worship him. He asked you to follow him into the inner kingdom, into recognition of the Father within, into the realization of oneness. When you turn within and rest in the presence, you are walking the path he walked. You are living the life he lived. You are embodying the truth he revealed. The Christ within you is your true identity. And now you know how to return to it at any moment. 7. Your life from this point forward. As you leave this teaching and return to the activities of your day, know that you are not returning as the same person who began this journey. Something within you has shifted. Something within you has awakened. Something within you has recognized itself. This recognition will continue to unfold. It will continue to deepen. It will continue to lift the veil of appearances day by day, moment by moment. You will find that your thoughts grow quieter, your heart grows gentler, your responses grow slower, your peace grows deeper, your trust grows stronger, your life grows lighter. This is the work of the presence. This is the fruit of recognition. This is the unfolding of grace. 8. A final word of blessing. My friends, I leave you with this blessing not as words, but as a consciousness. May the presence reveal itself to you in the silence. May grace govern every area of your life. May peace become your natural atmosphere. May the light within you shine without effort. May your path be guided without your striving. And may you never again forget that you and the Father are one. Rest now in that truth. Live now from that truth. Let your steps, your breath, your thoughts, your days all be carried in the rhythm of divine unfoldment. And remember, recognition is the key. Grace is the law, oneness is the reality, and the kingdom is within you now and forever.